Sorry, the delegate is speaking in indigenous language. Okay, this is the Ame language, because in the morning I've listened to the questions from the NGO. Therefore, we are really concerned. From the government's perspective, the government is intended to serve the needs of the civilians. I'm from the indigenous tribe of Ami. So, as for the question, as far as I know, in Article 10 of the amendments of the Constitution, it has already recognized on the importance of ensuring the indigenous language. According to the new regulations, what we are trying to do is to establish a variety of plans and programs. However, in the promotion of languages and cultures, we also have a consultation committee. In terms of a language, we have language promotion committee. In terms of education, we have education review committee. We also invite private organizations, scholars, and experts, and representatives from the indigenous tribes to provide opinions and comments on how we can do in terms of promoting and protecting the indigenous culture and language. Secondly, as you mentioned, many of the budgets are assigned to culture. Yes, culture, history, we have already lost the traditions and knowledge in the mainstream education curriculum. We need to focus on the translation and restoration of the historic data in the indigenous languages. Actually, we have already seen some results in the information that we provided. We have established the Endangered Language Preserve and Development Group from indigenous point of view to have a series of strategy to save the languages. And also, we are also hosting tribe schools. We have spent about 110 million NT dollars to save the endangered indigenous language. That is the fulfillment of the right of language. We have tried very hard to establish the indigenous language sign system of 42 languages of 14 different tribes. We have also edited the curriculum of indigenous languages. Maybe MOE can also respond about how the indigenous language is promoted in the school system. As for the teachers qualified for indigenous language teaching, now more than 8,000 people have had the certification, and more than half of them have already been actively teaching in the educational system, in the school system, in order to let the general public be aware of the indigenous language and prevent discrimination. We have the indigenous language website so that the general public are able to learn the endangered indigenous language through the internet. And this year, we also try to give rewards to the family or village who use native language during the meeting in public. We have tried to develop talents in this area, and we also promote the usage of native language through competition and contest. And the government needs to take the lead in promoting the protection and usage of these indigenous language with proper policies. And as an indigenous person myself, it's really sad to see that we struggle so much in the mainstream culture. With this program, through this program, I believe the rights and benefits of the indigenous population shall be improved, but there are still a lot of things to do. The force of NGO, as well as awakening the souls of the indigenous tribes, it is very important to restore the right of education for the indigenous population. That's why we have the idea of establishing tribe schools. This is outside of the compulsory educational system. We will invite the elderly people in the tribe. Since we have 14 different tribes, this year we are planning to have 3 tribe schools. One is the Taiwan tribe, the other is Bonoan tribe, and the third is the Ami tribe. 3 tribe schools will be established in different locations. We will host the class during summer and winter vacation. We will design the curriculum by ourselves. I hope that I can take a little bit more time for you to understand the contents of the curriculum. The curriculum of the tribe school is basically language and literature. Secondly, traditional skills. Third, social organization. Number 4, art and dancing. Number 5, traditional religion and rituals. Number 6, tribe history. Number 8, tribe ethics. We have 749 tribes or villages in Taiwan, and we have completed the basic documentation of more than 500 of them. We are trying our best to raise the awareness so that the world will be able to see Taiwan and see the indigenous culture and language. In addition to the tribes, we will host the class in different locations and venues within or outside the tribes. We are trying to instill the knowledge to the students through the daily activities of indigenous people. So this is a very important part of our efforts in trying to save and restore the endangered indigenous culture and language. With this immersive environment, we really see that the language skills, the native language skill, has been picked up among the youngsters. And as for the certification examination, that has a lot to do with employment opportunities. In the morning, we heard tribe people worrying that the language is disappearing and we are losing the collective memory or the community of the indigenous people. So we are trying to encourage people to take the exam and open the course in adequate place in order to give our people more opportunities for employment. And as for the indigenous names, my Chinese name is Wang Huiling. However, my indigenous name is Iling Lawa Panai, which Lawa Iling means the sounds of bells, and the other two names actually represents the name of my ancestor and the indigenous people. Once they decide on their indigenous names, they shall be able to go to the local government for registration. Lastly, with the issue of World Bank, I would like to ask one of my colleagues to answer this question. As for land development, should we answer them together, or we should talk about language first?
I would like to thank the lady for the very important information that she has provided for us, and considering that she herself is indigenous and she has described to us what her group is trying to do, may I suggest that part of your curriculum, a very important part of your curriculum, should be the rights of indigenous peoples as enshrined in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I believe that's a really important part of your curriculum. Thank you.
Thank you. I now would like to ask Mr. Alston the next question.
Well, while I really do appreciate the information that was given, most of my questions were not addressed. They were first the status in law of the UN declaration. Can we have a concise answer to that? Does it have any status in Taiwan? Is it supported by the government?
Wish to respond immediately? Yes, please.
联合国人权宣言在通过之后，其实我们
After we adopt a declaration of the UN, basically there are four aspects. The first is right to culture. We talked about it previously. The second is right of self-determination. There is a law of a self-determination of the indigenous people, and we plan to set a self-determination zone of the indigenous people. And the act is being reviewed by the Legislative Yuan, and the draft was rejected because there is a change of legislators. So we plan to send it to the Legislative Yuan again. There's a law of land and sea area of the indigenous people, which demands the government to recognize the land and the sea area owned by the indigenous people. So there's a draft of the act that is being reviewed. It also involves land development. For example, which area is regarded as the territory of the indigenous people. I think there is a rather large gap between how we define this land. So in the legislative process, that part is more time consuming. The fourth part is about the traditional wisdom of the indigenous people and how we protect it. In 2007, we had a act about the protection of the traditional or indigenous wisdom. So for anyone who wants to use the wisdom and culture and knowledge of the indigenous people, they have to first get authorization from the indigenous committee. We also have a law of indigenous people's education and employment right. So maybe after the meeting, we can provide you with the English translation of these laws so that you can refer our laws back to the declaration. Then you can see that the spirit of these laws actually complies with the declaration. Thank you.
Sorry, can I follow up? Yep, okay, so I take it, though, that the declaration itself has no status because there's been no... it's just that its spirit is reflected in certain legislative initiatives. So, two, I don't really want to take more time, but one question that was quite specific related to the... how many of the 8,000 certified indigenous teachers have full-time contracts? Just a percentage. And the second, why have only 20,000 of the total number of indigenous peoples indigenized their names? What are the obstacles?
Thank you. And I hand back to the delegation.
Thank you for your questions. In terms of indigenous, in terms of the name registration, actually our representative also talked about it. At the registration department, we have come up with a very comprehensive mechanism to change name and register their names. We have a colleague here who directly involves this work. Maybe we can ask her to talk about it, and we will talk about the dam building question. We will answer the dam building question later. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. In terms of name registration, according to our law of names, there are extra opportunities given to the indigenous people for them to change from Chinese name to their traditional name, or they can also, and vice versa. There's a limit of numbers, for example, twice. So if you change one to another, that's one change. And then if you change back, that's the second change. And only the indigenous people enjoy this two changes right. And the reason that this service seems to be underutilized is because that when they want to change their names, because this person's friends know him or her by their Chinese names. If they change their Chinese names into indigenous names, which are usually pretty long, and usually their friends cannot even say the full names, which is why they are more reluctant to change their names back to the indigenous names. And for the indigenous people who use Chinese names, they can use romanization to spell out their indigenous names. So basically, they can have two names. They can go by two names. So just a brief response. In terms of indigenous teachers, according to our stats, by the academic year of 2011, there are 2,171 indigenous teachers, and 500 in reserve, and another number of substitutes. So altogether, it's 2,900 teachers. In the 9-year curriculum, the elementary school students are required to learn indigenous language. As for junior high school students, it's up to the decision of the schools, so it's not compulsory. As mentioned earlier, there are 42 languages from 14 indigenous tribes. So our classes basically need to serve the needs of the students of the schools. So we don't have too many teachers who are able to teach the tribe language that the school students need. So we usually hire part-time language teachers, pay by hour, and the pay per hour is $260 for elementary school language teachers. And many of the tribe teachers are located in remote areas. So we have increased that amount from $260 to $360 per hour. We also compensate their transportation. And this is actually an extra measure for tribe language teachers, because we do not compensate transportation for other part-time teachers or substitute teachers. And in terms of the promotion of human rights in our curriculum, as mentioned earlier, I talked about the 7 major subjects. One of the chapters is dedicated to human rights. The value of human rights, the implementation of human rights, and the content of human rights. We start with the history of the development of human rights, all the way to covenants, as well as all the declarations and human rights organizations are incorporated in the chapter. And you can see similar topics in various subjects. So this is a rather comprehensive guideline for teachers to incorporate the concept of human rights in their education and teaching. Thank you. I'd like to address the question raised by Professor Alston. I think it's about construction. Were you asking about infrastructure such as a dam building? Ministry of Interior and Council of Indigenous Peoples Affairs have been working closely in this regard. For example, if there are public constructions in land areas of the indigenous people, we always fully consult the indigenous people before we proceed to construction. So I will ask my colleague to talk about the consultation mechanism. Indeed, there's room for improvement in terms of communication with the indigenous people. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. In the indigenous area, in terms of land use management, I believe this is a very fundamental in the country. As mentioned earlier, we have Indigenous People Basic Law, which was announced in 2005. And many of the regulations and laws about land use were announced much earlier than the Basic Law for indigenous people. So we talked about consultation. In current development process, in the review process, we basically consult indigenous people according to the regulation. So a lot of development projects, including dams or forest rezoning, if this involves the rights of the indigenous people, we basically follow the law. Without their consent, the development projects or land use change will basically be suspended because there's no consent from the indigenous people. So in the national park regulation as well as land use planning regulation, we have added articles about the consent from the indigenous people, and also we require, it is by law that we need to consult the indigenous people, and we need to work with the indigenous committee to set up with management and regulations of the land use. So the amended laws are being reviewed by the government agencies in order to achieve interdisciplinary coordination. And once this work is done, the draft will be sent to Legislative Yuan.
Determination for and when we're talking about self-determination of indigenous peoples, very high on the agenda is always the right to their natural resources and to their right to decide on the disposition of those natural resources as well as their sources of livelihood. Having said that, you just talked, sir, just now about indigenous lands, and you do have the Indigenous Peoples Basic Law. I'm perfectly aware of that. But in that, and it says in the report that that what you just said now is that if it is proclaimed indigenous land, then there are certain rules that govern indigenous land. But it seems to me that the IPBL itself is not very clear as to the definition of what is indeed indigenous land. So maybe I am misunderstanding it, and if you would like to clarify that, because before you can even decide on how to dispose of indigenous land, and you may not dispose of indigenous land, first everyone has to agree on a common definition of what is indigenous land. And in Taiwan, what is the common understanding of what is indigenous land?
Very much. I hand straight back to the delegation.
我想我简单的回答一下。
Just a brief response. According to the approved administrative zone for the indigenous people, there are 55 counties. However, the indigenous people look at these areas as their traditional land. So the number of indigenous people is relatively smaller. A lot of land in these 55 counties are occupied by non-indigenous people. So it's really difficult to identify or define, since not everybody living in these 55 counties are indigenous people. Basically, the indigenous people believe that within the area of the 55 counties should belong to the indigenous people. So when it comes to land development, if the land development projects are in the 55 counties, we would we basically first need to get consent from the indigenous people before we engage in land development projects.
Of interest here. What if there is a contradiction? What if there's a business interest, real estate developers who have already bought the land? prior to knowing that it is indigenous land, and it happens all the time, not just in Taiwan, what then is the policy of government?
I hand back to the delegation.
我们刚刚
As I mentioned earlier, before the consent, the development project will not be approved. As for the issue of ownership, so far there are two types of land of indigenous people. One is the conservation area for the indigenous people. That is the government, that is the land assigned to the indigenous population. That is about 260,000 hectares assigned by the government. If the indigenous people has a need of land, it can apply to the government to get the land. And the land can only be buy and sell between indigenous people. The purpose of the law is that the government on one hand provides to you the land. On the other hand, it would like to prevent the land assigned to indigenous people from losing. So within this 260,000 hectares, it is state property, but it can be granted by the government and become private property of indigenous people, which can be buy and sell among the indigenous population. So that is the difference between the land assigned to indigenous people and average lands. I hope this answered your question. The question of ownership.
Okay. I now, there is a question from Mr. Alston.
Eibe, or Mr. Chair, rather, I take it that we are now dealing with questions 1 to 5, and since there is only half an hour left, I would actually like to put a number of questions on to the table, which the delegation may be able to answer now or may want to try to provide additional information, but I think they're issues that we just need to recap also from our initial conversation on the first day. First, it is, well, the question is there a need for specific legislative recognition of economic and social rights in Taiwan's legislation? I would give 2 examples. The right to education would seem to be fully respected, at least through the age of 16. Why should that right not be proclaimed as a human right in legislation? If that were the case, would it also lead to the desirability of recognizing a right to housing, to provide a real legislative base for implementation of the relevant provisions of the covenant? That's the first question. Second, from the information that we have received, there is judicial resistance to using the Economic, Social and Cultural Rights Covenant. This is not unusual. Other judiciaries have the same problems. Again, perhaps legislation is desirable which would go beyond the present provisions of the Act of Implementation and would seek to spell out ways in which the courts could make use of the covenant, because until such steps are taken, it seems most unlikely that the references to the covenants will ever really deal with this one as opposed to the other covenant. Third, the National Institution for Human Rights. We had a very good discussion on the first day, and it revolved mainly around the constitutional dilemma of where such an institution would fit within the 5 organs of government, the 5 yuans. It does seem to me, however, that this is particularly important in relation to economic and social rights, that there should be a national institution. And I would only, this is really an observation rather than a question, with all due respect to the important work done by the control yuan, I have received almost no feedback from civil society which would indicate that this work, and particularly the work of the Human Rights Protection Committee, is adequate to make up for the role that a proper national institution would fulfill. So while the control yuan has important obligations, it's not enough to eliminate the need for a national institution. Fourth, the need to ratify other human rights treaties. Because we are dealing here with economic, social and cultural rights, I would emphasize in particular the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and the Convention on the Rights of Migrant Workers. Other colleagues might have others to add to that, but they seem all particularly important, and it would be very useful if the government had a formal position on that. I'm almost finished, Mr. Chair. Thank you. 6, the referendum rules are obviously both important and rather timely. It is not for, in my view, it is not for this committee to adopt a position on nuclear power, for example. But it is important, given that the government's own position is that the right of public participation as a human right is partly implemented through a referendum procedure. It is important that that referendum procedure really reflect or really facilitate genuine public participation. And again, there have been enough challenges raised to the various dimensions of the referendum law, the number of signatures needed initially, the process that it has to pass through, and of course the percentage of turnout which is required. All of the evidence available to us would indicate that the referendum rule is not actually a viable way of achieving its own stated objectives, and that some reform designed to make it more operational would be desirable. And the final point is just to ask what the plans of the government would be in terms of following up on this procedure. As our chair has said, this is an absolutely exemplary procedure, and I certainly congratulate the government and all others concerned, but it would be important not to say once you finally put Professor Riedel on the aeroplane, thank heavens, that's the end of it. He's gone. Thank you.
Thank you for singling me out. I hand back to the delegation. You have a long list of them, and in view of the fact that 10 minutes was spent on asking the question, you have at least 10 minutes to answer.
Okay, let me answer the first question because it is more of a broad question in concern with the future development of human rights issues in Taiwan. From the Presidential Advisory Committee of Human Rights, so I might be the proper person to address this issue. As for the establishment of the advisory committee, we have discussed a lot about this issue on the first day. Having a responsible national institution is actually the common goal for all of us. If we can have this organization and institution, it will be easier for us to promote our work. But as I've mentioned on the first day, due to the constitutional system, the 5 yuans and president, that is the recognized structure of our government. So if we want to establish a new institution or institute, it needs to be included in the existing structure. Of course, from the constitutional perspective, it is okay to put it under the executive yuan, but the independence of that organization may be criticized. And put it under the control yuan, that is the consensus of the majority. However, the Constitution has specifically assigned the responsibilities and obligations of president and the control yuan. And human rights protection is not the responsibility of either the president as well as the control yuan. That is because the structure of the Constitution, which in Taiwan is quite unique. So the establishment of such an institute will cause a lot of controversies. So the least favorable solution might be making amendments of the Constitution. However, we will not stop the promotion of human rights activities because of this. The Presidential Advisory Committee on Human Rights, although it is more like a task force, but the members of the committee, including Vice President and the Vice Minister, head of the different government departments or agencies, they pay a lot of attention to the protection of human rights. Therefore, we have made a lot of proposals which are supported by government, different government authority concerns. So the committee has been quite effective in order to host these review meeting. Of course, as said, the meeting is just a beginning, not an end.
To implement your recommendations in the conclusion report, we will form a task force to deal with these issues, to monitor and follow up. And we've already passed this in the advisory committee, and we have already asked our colleagues to come up with a plan. And there are several items. The first is a regulatory review. For laws and regulations that violate the declaration or covenants, we will review all of them, and we will talk and discuss with the relevant agencies to decide how to change or modify these laws, regulations, and so on. And we will come up with a time frame, a schedule, basically, with a deadline as to when to complete the amendment of laws. I think this is probably one of the most important works in the future. The second thing will be about education and training. We understand that without the direction of the Presidential Advisory Committee on Human Rights, it would probably be a little bit disorganized if education and training was done by various agencies. So education and training will be coordinated by the Advisory Committee. In Taiwan, besides central government. There are also local governments. Local governments are closely related to the protection of human rights. And also, you can see that their measures and policies of human rights don't seem to be reviewed here in the meeting over the past 2 days. Also, we think about we talk about human rights of children. When we were in the planning stage of the Presidential Advisory Committee on Human Rights, we wanted to set a task force or a team to look at the core of human rights. However, that was suspended due to some constitutional limits. But that didn't stop because in a country, which is why we wanted to form or to come up with a legislation about legalization of covenants. The reason to the new law is to solve the predicament that Taiwan is not a member of the UN. So, for example, when Taiwan was denied in terms of ratification of covenants, so we hope that through legislation, all the UN covenants and core human rights covenants will be able to ratify by Taiwan easily and to gain legal status for these covenants. And this is also one of the very important works that our committee is working on. And also, we've already sent the case to the new premier, and there is a committee member assigned directly by the premier to oversee or look at the issue designatedly, and he will be the coordinator of various government agencies. So in all the covenants that we want to sign, currently so far do not include core human rights covenants. But I believe that as long as the Presidential Advisory Committee on Human Rights make the demands, then our team or our group will basically follow the demand and incorporate these covenants of human rights into the discussion of the group, including human rights protection covenant for children and for the disabled. So through the mechanism, we will be able to incorporate these covenants into our discussion. And we also would like to uphold Paris Declaration. And in terms of investigation right, we probably won't be able to do that due to practical difficulties. However, for other works, we will do our best to achieve them. We wouldn't stop these works in the future. And in terms of ICESCR, and to see if they if we can use them as a target of litigation, it has actually generated a lot of controversies here in Taiwan, because a lot of the rights stated in ICCPR involve budgeting issues and financial issues. We understand that ICCPR recently took effective, and the committee will deal with the litigations of the states parties to ICCPR. But the committee just recently took effective, so we're not sure how the mechanism or how things are done there, but maybe in the future we'll be able to know or understand better how we implement ICCPR in our litigation system. because honestly speaking, how to implement ICESCR in litigation, there are a lot of controversies here in Taiwan. So we very much would like to have more information as to how to implement that in our legal system or litigations, so that our judges better understand how to deal with that. Of course, training and education are very important, be it prosecutors, judges, or administrative officials need training and education of human rights. So that is something that we will definitely do in the future. From the perspective of MOJ, we would like to connect the teaching materials or training materials of human rights with our daily work instead of just theoretical training materials. So we're writing up the training materials along with prosecutors and correctional officers in jails. There's also Department of Anti-Corruption. We will basically write up teaching materials for these departments and to conduct training and education for these people. Of course, in the future, we're going to expand that to cover also police force and administrative staff who work firsthand with people of Taiwan. Thank you.
Partially answered the question number 2, which was on the judicial resistance of using ESCR rights, and what concrete steps are you planning to get the judges to change their attitude?
Of course, we hope to have information. We hope to get information to come up with training materials so that we can provide the training materials to our judges so that our judges understand internationally how ICCPR is applied in litigations and in the judicial system. So we need, with international materials, I think it's easier for us to convince our judges.
We only have another 7 minutes, but Articles 2, 2, and 3 need to be addressed. So. Professor Shin, you have the floor.
I'm very concerned about the time constraints, and but I have to address, especially not everything within this short time, but especially on Article 3, which relates to equal enjoyment of economic, social, and cultural rights by women. You know, and I'm very glad that you have very positive attitude. I just hope that you have full understanding also about the issue of gender equality in dealing with economic, social, and cultural rights. So I'm going to raise a little bit of issues here. It's very commendable that Taiwanese government ratified CEDAW even ahead of ratification of ICCPR and ICESCR. So there has been a lot of progress from 2009 and up until now. And I think that it is very good sign that you come up with review of all existing laws, policies, regulations, etc., which is in the time frame of 3 years. I hope it's going to be finished soon. And also, in order to do that, data collection is very important, you know, the necessary data collection. And I see that you have collected some data, but which is not enough, of course. And I hope that you will work with statistical office, if you have, you know, in assessing the need, which areas you need to collect more data, because data collection is really the base, you know. And I'm also happy to see that you have gender impact assessment, not only on major and importantly considered areas, but actually this should be done in all areas, whatever policies and law or campaign you will come up with. And So with all these positive progress that you are moving with so far, I want to point out that there are 3 things missing that you need to pursue in the near future. The first one is gender budgeting. Yeah, and I see from the report that you said that the funding to implement various measures to protect the gender and human rights shall be allocated in priority if the country's financial position permits it. Yeah, there should be no if. Gender budgeting means when you come up with laws, plans, policy, programs, whatever, you need to allocate funds, necessary for that. Because that's another side of the sword with gender impact assessment and budget allocation. So we call it gender budgeting or gender responsive budgeting, etc., whatever you name it. So budgeting, is very important. So that's I don't see in your system yet. So you need to systemize it, whether by law or and then another thing that is missing, which is very important, is temporary special measures to accelerate de facto substantive equality of results. You are doing it, but it would be very slow. And to accelerate it, you will need a special temporary measure for women's equal enjoyment. So if you have very few female students who major in engineering, for example, which is common to all countries, then you need to allocate a special scholarship for female students majoring in that area, which is just one example of that. So that's, and then lastly, which is more difficult and takes a long time, is to how to change discriminatory tradition, customs, cultures, etc. You just enjoyed 1 week long lunar calendar New Year, for example. For women, holidays is called Labor Day, Yeah, and women would all agree with me. So the deeply rooted patriarchal culture needs to be changed. Gender role stereotype, which takes a long time. And you need to really develop how to change that in your system. So I pointed 3 things: gender budgeting, temporary special measure, and how to change the gender role stereotypes. And I wish you all the success in your effort. Thank you. And just one last one, because I'm so pressed with time, yeah? It's not fair. One last thing. In order to do all this, you have Gender Equality Commission, Gender Equality Department. Does it have enough power and authority and budget to do all these? That's my question. I don't know who will address this answer. Yeah.
Okay, I hand back to the delegation to give a brief answer.
好，非常感谢委员对性别。
Thank you very much for your concern and care about gender equality. Indeed, this is a big work. In the interest of time, I am going to briefly talk to you about the current status of this work. You mentioned gender mainstreaming, major works in this area. For example, gender statistics. The Statistical Office of the Executive Yuan is engaged in this work, and we are basically doing gender statistics in various departments, and we have brought with us data and charts for your reference, and you can find complete information on our website. And we are reviewing to identify if these statistics are comprehensive or not. So we try to map out and cross-reference and try to identify statistical gaps. And also, in terms of CEDAW, we are reviewing our laws and regulations now. We have about 30,000 laws and regulations that are being reviewed now. In the same time, we are also doing gender statistics of each laws and regulations in order to give a more holistic picture of gender statistics. And in the new regulations and amended laws, as well as long-term and large projects are included in gender impact analysis projects. And also gender budgeting. The statistical office is also collecting data on an annual basis. We're reviewing this. We believe that gender statistics right now, or excuse me, gender budgeting is not complete yet. So the Executive Yuan is now convening meetings to look at the scope of gender budgeting to come up with a more comprehensive measure. I think in another few months that will be finalized. You also talked about various human rights or female rights. If we only say in laws that okay, everybody's equal, but in reality it may not be the case. So we need, for example, temporary measures, which is stated in CEDAW as well. I think your recommendation is really good. For example, to encourage more female students in engineering departments, we can have, for example, scholarships as an incentive. I think Ministry of Education is also working very hard on this. For example, in high schools, we organize human civilization or science camps during summer and winter vacations to encourage female students to take part in. As for male students, in terms of humanities studies, we also encourage them to be more involved in that. We have temporary special measures to encourage the removal of stereotypes of gender so as to facilitate gender equality. As for other temporary measures, for example, in terms of elections, we have special regulations, for example, nominations of parties. We have, for example, a guarantee quota for female candidates, and also we have a specific percentage of female elected candidates as well. Many countries have been implementing CEDAW for several years, and we are collecting many of their temporary measures, and we are compiling them, and we provide this material and information to various departments. We basically borrow all the exemplary measures from other countries.
Lastly, about sharing of domestic works. Indeed, looking around the world, female employment has been affected by the responsibility of the domestic work, and that is the same case in Asian countries. So the stereotype division of labor, in addition to teaching the students at a young age about the right concept, we also leverage the media. We have produced a lot of video clips for promotion that both male and female should share the domestic work fairly, so that female burden, if once female has less burden in terms of domestic work, then she will have the capability to pursue her own career. We have seen cases like examples like this around the world. For example, Hillary Clinton once highlighted in a meeting in San Francisco that we need to get rid of the obstacles and barriers for females to develop their professional career. So we need to change the stereotype concept of division of labor so that women are treated fairly at both work and at home. Thank you. As for the referendum, can we have the MOI to respond to these questions? Let me briefly answer the question. As for the Referendum Act, is usually about in concern with controversial public issues. At this moment, the Referendum Act was stipulated in 2003. At that time, it has raised extensive discussions. During the years, a lot of people think that the threshold required is too high. Therefore, we have hosted rounds of public hearings, invited not only scholars and experts, but also representatives from different political parties to join the discussion. But so far, we haven't built a consensus yet. So in the future, if there is a consensus to make amendments of the Referendum Act, yes, then it will be possible. But the prerequisite is that we need to have a consensus built before that. Thank you. As for the question that we haven't answered yesterday, is about the rise of the teenager who got pregnant. Can we have the delegates to explain on that? As for the question raised yesterday, we are here to provide further explanation. As for that the governments do not allow the marriage for adolescents, but it seems that it is allowed in Taiwan. In Taiwan, the age defined as adult is 20 years old, which is different from 18 years old in UN. But the Civil Act stipulate that the lawful age for marriage is 18 for male and 16 for female. In 2011, since we haven't had the statistics of 2012, in 2011 we have 630 marriage registered for couples at a younger age. We probably would need to discuss whether we need to refer to the covenants of UN to set the lawful age of marriage at 18 years old. And since now it requires registration for the marriage to be valid, and if that's the case, the number for younger adults marriage will be reduced according to the new law. Secondly, the second question is that whether people in common law partner, whether their rights are properly protected. We are basically paying attention to the practice in other countries. In Taiwan, relevant protections can be seen in different laws. For example, in civil law, for common law partners, if they constitute a family, then they have the obligation to support each other. Once each of them pass away, then the rights of the survival side will be protected. And also, the grand jury also pay attention to this issue as to the taxation. And the MOF is conducting studies on this matter for common law partners. Their rights and benefits should be protected as married couples. As for their children, since they are not born under lawful marriage, we have the system of adoption. The biological father is entitled to adopt the child, and the child can also request the biological father for adoption. And once the adoption process is completed, these children will enjoy the same protection as children born under a lawful marriage? This is the brief answer for that question. Thank you.
We have come to the close of our dialogue, but I would like to give you the chance to say a few words.
Chairman, committee members, lastly, we'd like to thank you for taking this occasion to conduct these constructive dialogue with the government delegation, and you have made important concerns and recognitions, comments, recommendations in concern with human rights. We truly appreciate your dedication in this aspect, and our delegation has explained the progress, the challenges, and the measures that we will take in the future. We truly learn a lot from this dialogue. Again, I have to emphasize that our determination of implementing the covenants has not been changed. We will try our best to overcome all the obstacles to improve the human rights in Taiwan. Lastly, we'd like to extend to you our most sincere appreciation and gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
谢谢.
And for all the efforts that have gone into it. Let us face it, this is a unique and an exemplary exercise in human rights monitoring. Many other countries could learn from this experience. The intensity of participation from civil society and from government departments is just staggering. I didn't expect that, and it will help us a great deal in our work. Now, not all the issues were covered in the dialogue, but of course we also have the extensive report and the answers to the list of issues, and that will help us in drafting our recommendations in the next day and a half. And I was quite aware that many more issues could have been discussed in more detail, and I look to my left that certain issues were slightly underrepresented, but that will not be the case as far as the recommendations at the end are concerned. I think if we look back over the last 2 days, we will find that this is a beginning. And I quote you directly. You said, the review meeting is just a beginning, not an end. And I totally agree with you, and all the members on the group here take the same view. And that's why we all take human rights very, very seriously and want to see how this process that has started can be continued. Thank you very much for all your input.